When I equate what failure is, it's a bitter meal. It's like a large plate of something that you really don't want to swallow, but it's really nutritious. And when I think about all the times that this has happened in my career, and all of the bitter meals that I've eaten, that's really what inspired me to make this the topic of discussion today, because I think that it is so important, and I think that all of you are at such an important place in time in your careers that understanding what failure is and why it's important, and looking at my experience of failing will hopefully help you guys when you fail as well. So I have some context. I thought this was a perfect gift, by the way, when I was in Google Slides, and I'm like, what is something that's really relatable to like my attempt at being a professional and then sort of the end result? And I felt like this cat was me. But for context, I have to start when I was a kid, right? Because I think that when we're kids, the experiences that we have, the interactions that are bestowed upon us, challenge our idea of failure. And so my childhood and my teen years were sort of a golden age of failing for me. And for better or worse, I would say somewhat for worse, I developed a lot of anxiety and insecurity about failing, right? Failure was bad in my family. When you failed, you didn't really talk about it that much. There were things that I perceived as failure when I was in school, and maybe many of you can relate to this as well. I was very bad at sports. I have asthma, so running around was not great for me, which is part of the reason why I started making art. I wore the wrong clothes. My family always made fun of me for the types of clothes that I wore. They always wished that I sort of presented myself differently, so I was sort of internalized that as being a failure. Surprisingly, I grew up having the wrong face, so looking a certain way, wearing makeup, I didn't really do those things, and so that was something that I perceived as being very wrong with me. I was rejected by an art teacher when I was in middle school and high school for just being too much. She didn't want me to come back to class. She was like, Corinne doesn't really have that much potential as an artist, so I can't teach her. And so my mom was like, yeah, that makes sense. So, took me out of the class. And then I grew up in a family where art was already established. My sibling, very good artist. She is 3 years older than me, so she got all sort of the grace and celebration. And I was just sort of like, yeah, Corinne does art too. Just like Corinne's over there drawing her cat people and her OCs and her dragons. And, she's going to go do something else. She's not going to be an artist. And, much to everyone's surprise, here I am. But and then my early art just not receiving that sort of like validation, that attention that I wanted from the people that were really important to me. And so I sort of developed this idea that failure just couldn't be something that I could experience. I needed to avoid it at all costs. And so instead of building confidence and understanding myself, accepting those setbacks, I really just sort of changed how I looked at it. The other problem with growing up, I think, in modern day society is that media told me that failure was terrible, right? Every show, every story that was iterated throughout my childhood was just like, you're not a failure. Failure is not an option. When failure does happen, terrible things happen in the story. And so we get to my college years. No failing ever again, right? So I had already developed this strategy when I was in high school that I was going to be the best at everything. And it worked for a little while. It definitely worked in college. It made me such a good student because I worked tirelessly to be the best in class, to have, more than enough work, and it was all driven by anxiety. It all came from a really terrible place, not of sort of self-sustenance and growth, but this idea that I was going to die, like it was a survival instinct if I didn't have the best of the best. And so I have some of my charcoal drawings from my foundation year because during that time, as many of you know, you're drawing still lives, you're drawing sort of these like objective fine art pieces. And so whatever my teacher asked us to draw, I was like, you want me to draw socks? I'm going to spend 25 hours drawing those socks. I'm going to carve into that newsprint paper like my life depended on it. And that's what I did. And the positive takeaway from that is that I became really good at art, right? I started to really excel. My technical skills thrived in school because I had that survival instinct of I cannot do anything less than perfect. And so, yeah, so I succeeded. I'm not going to talk too much about my college years. I won some awards. I was very successful sort of locally and regionally with my work. I was sort of on cloud 9 with my artwork in school because all of the validation that I didn't receive when I was a kid, I was now getting from my peers, from my teachers, from the institution. And so my work went from sort of this one style that was a little bit choppy. I didn't really understand what I was doing. That was maybe like my mid-semester sophomore year, into something that looked like illustration. I was going to be an illustrator, right? The work I made was well received. This won a national award for an illustration competition. I got like a bunch of money for it. I went to New York. The president of the school at the time went to join me. It was huge. My work showed growth, right? So I was set up to believe that I had addressed everything in my work, that I had sort of pushed that serious commitment to my career. That's a picture of me my senior year, and I decided to sell my work at my senior show, and I made some money off of it. So, you know, in really like an egotistical fashion, I fanned myself at the money that I made. But I was really feeling good about the work that I was making. I really felt confident that I was ready. And I thought that I would be okay. And then I graduated, which for some of you here, you're at that point now, right? You're in your second or your last semester at school, and you're about to graduate. And so I graduated being really confident that I was leaving sort of this space where I had learned all of this stuff, and the big wide world was going to accept me, and I was going to be okay. But that's what I did. I did leave the ecosystem where I had mastered this idea of success. My strategy for succeeding, for survival, which is what I equated success with, was no longer sort of in my immediate vicinity. And so I no longer had my source of feedback and thus my validation that sort of carried me through my college years. I no longer had those people that were standing right next to me being like, Corinne, you're the best, you can do it. You know, like people that had really supported me. And then I failed. I failed really quickly out of school, and I failed a lot. So talking about failing professionally, I think that this is a really funny statement because when your teachers talk to you about being a student in schools, myself especially, I say that you're here to learn how to be a professional. You're here to apply your professionalism so that when you graduate, you know, it'll be less likely that you make mistakes and you can sort of build this this career that, you know, will sustain you. But I don't think that my first, you know, 5 or 6 years out of graduation were handled very professionally. I don't know if I could put that term professional in sort of the way that I presented myself, but that's what I was referred to, and that's what everyone referred to me as, right? When you graduate, you're a professional now. It's kind of like people saying, well, you're an adult, and you're like, I've never even owned a car, you know? Like there are just some things that you have to do before that term really fills in, before you really fill in those shoes. So I have a few lessons, anecdotal stories that kind of go along with those lessons, and things that I hope will allow you guys to sort of understand yourselves better through what I experienced. And so the first lesson that I'm going to talk about today is that sometimes your work isn't good enough, no matter how hard you try. And coming from the perspective of somebody who, where trying really hard had gotten me so far, trying really hard and having nothing work out for me was a difficult thing to have to come to terms with. And, you know, I had some failures in school, but I could work around them. I strategized around them. So when I first graduated, I had won that national award, right? And so and this was in New York. New York is kind of like the heart of all of the editorial illustration, visual communication in general. So the Wall Street Journal reached out to me immediately after I graduated. And they were like, Corinne, we want you to do an article for our op-ed. And I was like, oh, I've made it, right? Like it was further proof that I knew what I was doing. And so they gave me this strange setup. It was like a 2-inch by 25-inch illustration, and the whole article was about underground internet cables that go across the ocean. And I honestly can't even remember the context of the article, but they were like, we want there to be a diverse ecosystem. We want the internet cables to feel like, you know, they're stretching along these like different like ecosystems. And I was like, perfect. So the natural science part of myself was like, I'm going to look up coral, I'm going to look up kelp and different species of fish, and you know, I'm going to make this like a really cool, exciting illustration. And so I very naively Googled what internet cables look like underground, and I had them match that exactly, because in my head, I was like, I want to accurately depict what's going on. And so I worked really hard. I had about a week to finish it. And so I wish I had a better example of this, but it's so small because it's such a crazy, tall illustration. And I submitted it the night before it was due, so I did everything correct. And then at about 6:50 the next morning, I was awoken by the sound of my phone ringing. Kept my phone right next to my bed. And so I looked at it, and it was a number that I didn't recognize, but they kept calling me over and over and over again, and I answered, and it was the art director for the Wall Street Journal for this assignment that I had just submitted. And he said, Corinne, I just took a look at the illustration that you did. It doesn't communicate any of the things that we needed to communicate, and it was rejected by the editor. This is going to print in 15 minutes, and we need changes to this illustration. You need to get those changes done, and then you need to resubmit it. And so it was a hard lesson right out of the gate that I had done a bad job and that somebody was paying the price for it. And so I was freaking out. And so he said, no one is going to understand that these are underground internet cables. In my head, I was like, but I referenced them exactly. They look like the picture. But with editorial, and if you've done editorial stuff in your classes, you know that it's about design and communication. It's not necessarily about accurate reference. And so no one knows what those look like, but the readers had to understand that those were internet cables without actually being accurately representative of them. So he's like, I don't know, just like add some copper cabling in them. People understand that like cables have copper in them, and maybe that'll be good enough. And so in 15 minutes, I opened Photoshop and I'm sorry, again, I don't have a high-res version of this, but I have the worst rendition of copper cables that I think I've ever drawn in my life. This was all digital, so I put a layer on top of everything else. I sketched out sort of the opening, and then I did some brush strokes, and I added some kind of texture on top of it, and I was like, I guess this is good enough. And it wasn't, because they never contacted me ever again. So and at the time, we're going to get into this one in a second, but at the time, everyone was celebrating that I got a job from the Wall Street Journal. My family was like, Corinne, you're doing such a good job. My friends were like, oh, Corinne, we're going to ride on your coattails because you're so successful. You're already working for the Wall Street Journal. And then I had to internalize that and say, yes, I definitely got that job, but they definitely didn't like what I made. And then my second experience, about 6 months after that, I got a job from this Japanese trading card game, which was really exciting. It was a different country that was contacting me for their sort of like mobile app. And this particular one was really interesting because I had sort of set up this stylistic approach that I was really confident in. And as soon as I got a job for this game, I had thrown everything that I learned into the trash, and I tried to be this sort of like hyper-realistic fantasy illustrator, because that's the style that they had sort of promoted on their website. So that didn't work out for various reasons. One, I couldn't draw people. I'd somehow gotten away with not drawing people that much in college, and so they were like, draw this like sexy lady that looks like Scarlett Johansson, and she's gonna turn into this like evil bug woman when you like empower the card. And so I had to look at like 80 pictures of Scarlett Johansson and not really capture her sort of like best features. And between the two cards, I ended up spending about 80 hours on it, which if you break down the math of 80 hours versus $1,200, not including taxes, that's like not even close to minimum wage. So I spent so much time on this. It didn't work out. They were really frustrated with it. They had to kind of keep bringing the drawing back to me and say, oh, can you fix the shoulder a little bit? Can you change that hand a little bit? Like, we really don't like the light and the color that you're using. Can you sort of like alter that? And so it was a long, drawn out process. They had to send me the paperwork over like physically, and I had to sign and get it back to them, and it got lost in the mail. It was a terrible experience. And not only did they not email me with a second job, but they never used my work in the game. And so even though I spent all of this time, they ended up paying me for the work, it wasn't up to par. It wasn't good enough professionally to be considered for this project. And then very soon after that, I got a job from Green Source magazine. So editorial, round 2, can Corinne do it? Spoiler alert, the answer is no. So the art director had given me this article about, the article's name was Containability to Sustainability. It was about sort of taking funds from like military budgets and weaponry and then pushing it towards like conservation and like environmentally friendly practices. So it was right up my alley in terms of subject matter. I sent the art director a few sketches, and she got back to me initially. So I sent her these 2 up here, and she looked at them and she was like, no, Corinne, this is for like a spot in a magazine. This isn't like a full cover page illustration. Like you have to go back to the drawing board, do something new. If an art director tells you that none of your concepts are working, you have to go back to the drawing board and do something entirely new. That is really stressful for everyone involved, because this was another week-long assignment. So I gave the sketches to them in a few days. They were like, no, redo it. You have to change entirely what you're doing. So I sent them these. I don't even know what this is, honestly. If I look back in time, like, what am I trying to depict here? And so, of course, she chose this one, the grenade with the flowers coming out of it, and I managed to get that done. And if I'm being objective, when I look at that illustration, like, I enjoy it. It's sort of this old grenade that's rotting, and these flowers are coming out of it, so it worked. But the way that I handled that process, and the fact that I didn't understand how the project was supposed to be approached, that art director never contacted me again for another job. And so throughout my first sort of 2 years, it was this on repeat. It was this over and over again. I would get jobs because I had won that national award, and so people are like, Corinne's a professional. Corinne can handle this. Corinne cannot handle this. So I did various different illustrations, some for brands. I did some gallery work. I did this was for like a card game, which I think is the only successful one that I did. And that was the only art director to contact me back. But all the other stuff, people were just like, this isn't really what I want. You're not doing a good job. You're not succeeding as the visual communicator that we thought that you were. And this cow piece, this is probably the worst one. And so I'm gonna touch upon this for a second. So this was like maybe 1.5 years, 2 years after graduation. I got an email from an advertising company. Now, for those of you who are in the know with advertising, there's a few professionals in here, they pay a lot of money. They were going to pay me $30,000 to do a billboard campaign for them. This was an Italian dairy company, so they sold yogurts, they sold cheeses, they sold milks, and so they wanted me to do this billboard that they could use on different sort of marketing materials. It was a huge job. This would have paid off more than half of my student loans in one go. And so for me, this was groundbreaking. Like, I got my foot in the door, and now I just had to prove myself. So all of the other failures that I had, I wasn't gonna do that again. I was gonna try really hard. I was gonna nail this assignment. And so this was spec work. And so for those of you who are unfamiliar with spec work means that you do illustrations for the company so that they can figure out if they wanna hire you, right? So it was me and 30 other participants in this spec work trial. And I had sent them a bunch of sketches. Sketches got approved. This was the final round where I did 2 different billboard sketches. It was me and one other person trying to get this job. And so they loved my conceptual sketch. And in the corner here, you'll notice that this cow is a little bit more detailed with the sort of surrounding environment. And so they said, Corinne, we just need to see what this is going to look like finished. We need to see what you're capable of as an illustrator. And so I don't want to tell you how much time I spent on that, but it was enough time to justify getting all of this work. So I tried my very best on this, and I tried to nail the architecture, the cow, the environment. I was like, I'm going to look at all these weird cactus and plants that they're sending me, and I'm going to make sure that those are accurate because that's what they want. And then that's what they sent me. They said that my style was too complicated, and they were sorry, but they're going to go with the other candidate. And so all of that effort that I had put into making sure that this was the best illustration possible still overshot. This time I overworked something, and it became too complicated. It was no longer representative of something that was easy to work with as an advertisement. And so I was, I wasn't enraged. I was so full of failure, and I kept checking back in with that company to see what the actual final work that they went with looked like, and it looked like this, which is great. No shame to this illustrator, but they understood the assignment. They did something that was simple, and they did something that was easily sort of copy and pasteable on different surfaces, right? So it's very shape-based, it's very color-based, it's clean cut, and so they could put that on bottles, they could put that on vending machines, they could put that on the side of a truck, and that's what they wanted. And I didn't do that. I was going to do some overly complicated Photoshop illustration with 500 different layers on it, and that was unworkable. And so that was a hard lesson for me to learn about how my work just wasn't that good. Lesson number 2, if you don't learn to work with yourself, you're going to work against yourself. And sort of an addendum to that is that people are relying on you. And so I learned that lesson for my first few jobs, and then it was especially prominent with this particular one. For those who've had me in class, you guys know, maybe I've mentioned it before, but I have ADHD. So I have time blindness, I have executive dysfunction disorder, I have anxiety that's based off of all of my experiences, including this one. And so I have a lot of things that just in my day-to-day are like little cogs in or sort of a wrench in the works, right? Things that stop the really efficient flow of creative juices. And I was still learning about how to deal with that as a professional. I did not tackle that at all in school because I avoided it in school. I was like in survival mode when I was in college. And so now that I sort of started to have a life and I had to incorporate art into my life, I was really bad at it. And so this was a job that I got from Crystal Dynamics, who was led by one of the art directors who had hired me previously for that sort of card game, that weird sort of doll that I drew. And so this was his second chance for me. This was like, Corinne, I like your style. I have this project that I've been hired on to do. Would you like to be a participant? And so this was an advertising campaign for the new Tomb Raider game that was coming out this time. This is like 10 years old at this point, or 12 years old. So it's been a while. So all of the big artists in New York were working on this. Some of my peers that were highly successful, that were sort of like rocketing ahead of me, were a part of this project. So I thought that this was going to be a jump in the right direction. I was going to catch back up to them, and I was going to be successful. Except my executive dysfunction got in the way. This job was so stressful because it meant so much to me that I physically couldn't make sketches for it. I remember I had just started dating a friend of mine at the time, and I was at his house, and I was just sitting there on his couch, and I'm looking at the assignment, and he walked in the room, and he's like, Corinne, what's wrong? Like, wait, aren't you supposed to be working? I was like, I can't work. I can't make these ideas. And so these sketches were 2 weeks late. 2 weeks late on one of the biggest projects that could have shaped my career. Mark was emailing me, the art director, his name is Mark, he was emailing me, he was like, Corinne, what's going on? Just contact me, let me know, like, I just need to know what's going on. Like, can you just communicate with me? And so the anxiety of being late on the sketches started to make it even harder to make the sketches. Everything started to build on top of themselves. And finally, he was like, Corinne, if you don't send me these sketches in the next few days, you're off the project. And something in my ADHD brain just clicked. And I was like, oh, I can work now. Okay, all right, I'm almost dead. This project is almost dead. All right, survival mode kicks in. I can now finish the sketches. And so many of you might have been through that already, right? You might have found yourself in an art block or some sort of creative stint where you are unable to create something. And if you do have something like ADHD, where your brain sort of works against itself, you might have found yourself in a similar situation. So because I didn't experience how to deal with that when I was in college, I was now dealing with it professionally. Needless to say, I got him sketches, he selected one, and then in like 4 days, I came up with this illustration. I brought it to a finish, and so I was like, working 12, 15-hour days just to get this done, just to get it done by the original deadline. And of course, if I had started it when the project started, I would have had plenty of time to finish it. So the lesson is really that you can't avoid who you are as a person. Everyone here is going to have setbacks, right? And you have to figure out how to strategize. So now, if I ever get a project that I know is going to have a really short deadline, I have certain things that I put into place. I make sure that I have space. I take away all electronics. I'm like 4 years old, right? I sit myself down at the table and I set a timer so that I know that I have a certain amount of time, so I can put some sort of synthetic pressure in my environment that will snap me out of it and say, okay, no, you have to do something. You have to do something for this project. And then once I start it, it's fine. I can keep working on it. But that was a hard lesson to learn. Or will never contact me for freelance again. So, we are 3 years post-graduation. I am living at home. I am broke. No one wants to hire me for freelance, right? Like, I've burned a lot of bridges so far. A lot of professional companies have tried to work with me, and I have not done well because I'm learning all of these things that I need to learn. And my friends and family still believe I know what I'm doing, but I know the truth, right? I have full-on sort of, whether you want to call it imposter syndrome, whether you want to call it sort of this like internalized sense that I'm a complete failure. I have a completely different understanding of where I'm going in my trajectory. So lesson number 3, get a job. Get a job, guys. My creative career was not working out for me. So I was like, I want to be independent. I want to still do the art thing, but I can't sustain myself on art alone. And I sort of had to kind of deal with that and sort of deal with the rejection and the failure of not being a professional artist that could sustain myself in my art. So I already kind of had a job. I was a dog walker when I graduated because I needed the gas money and stuff like that. And I really had to seriously think about what kind of job I could get that could really sustain me while I'm building up my art, because my art thing is not working out, but I didn't want to give up. So that was the one thing that I would give myself credit for, is that I did not give up. So for the next 8 years, which was 2012 to 2019, I worked 3 different jobs. One, I was an adjunct instructor at Montserrat. I tricked them into hiring me. I know Stacy's here. But I fooled everyone into thinking that I was a professional. And honestly, we're not going to get into my teaching, but for the first few years of teaching, I also had to learn a lot about being a teacher and being an effective teacher at that. But I was an adjunct instructor for 8 years. That's a seasonal gig, you're contract-based, so during the summer, I didn't have a job, so I also worked as an estate gardener. So I worked for people in the city who had these big sort of rolling gardens that needed somebody with an artistic edge to maintain their gardens and plant their plants and make everything look really sculptural. And so my creative background made me sort of a good candidate for that position. And I also really like nature and I like working outside. So between both of those things and working on my art at the same time, I was able to sort of elevate everything together. But for years, I was not hired on as a commercial artist. I had to figure out another way, another output for my work. And so I decided to do gallery stuff. So these are just different examples of what my gallery work looked like. You guys are looking at this, you're like, that doesn't look like Corinne's work. And you are correct. I sacrificed what I wanted my work to look like for what I thought people wanted in galleries. And for a little while, it worked out. I had a lot of color, some like weird and friendly concepts that I thought were relatable. Prior to getting these two jobs, I did attempt other sort of creative avenues. I tried to get a job at a greeting card company, and this was the sort of greeting card I sent them. I didn't learn enough about graphic design when I was in college, so the graphic design on it is terrible. And the gallery would take 50% of that profit away, which is unfortunately normal. It's a normal part about how galleries run. They present your work, and so they take that sort of commission fee. But I could only sell my work for $600 or $700. So if that's cut in half, I'm only getting paid about $300 for something that I'm spending about 2 weeks on. And so I was doing a lot of these gallery jobs, and they kept coming in. They wanted me to produce stuff, but I couldn't sustain myself on that work alone. And so this was my life for a very long time, for like 5 years. I was getting myself into different galleries. I was still working on my art, right? I never gave up. I was always looking for opportunity, but I wasn't making any money off of it. I was slowly starting to understand what I wanted my work to look like. This piece, which was actually a book cover from Penguin Random House, came through, I think, in like 2016, and that was like a light in the dark, right? They were like, Corinne, we want you to work on this professional thing. And I was like, commercial illustration? Like, I can be like a commercial illustrator again? And they were like, yeah, it's based off a piece that you did when you were in college. And so I was like, great, all right, I peaked. And I peaked in college. Now everything else is gonna be based off of like 1 or 2 pieces that I made when I was apparently the best artist that I was ever gonna be. And so they were like, can you do the wolves like that one wolf that you drew at the same time? And for those of you who have, yes, yeah, it's that one. So that was sort of an internal shame thing. I was like, okay, so I guess my college work is just better than my professional, but I still tried my best. I messed up on the graphic design here. They wanted me to do the text, and if that is brought down to a book size, you are not going to be able to see that text. So they ended up changing the text entirely for the finished book, and increasing the saturation of the colors because I just didn't add enough color in there. So even that job, there's a lot of major changes to that, and I was still trying to figure out how to do what the art director wanted. Which brings me to my second to last lesson, which is that finished is better than perfect. There is a saying, and I hope that I can remember it now, my ADHD brain can pull it out of my sort of inventory space, but for those of you who are familiar with Greg Manches, he talks about the process of how we sort of work against ourselves. And so when we want to be perfect with something, and perfect is an unachievable goal, first and foremost, but when we go and we head towards something with the intention to be perfect, we start to procrastinate, right? So if we go back to my other lesson, I procrastinated on those sketches because I wanted them to be perfect. I wanted the concepts to be perfect. And if you want that perfection, you start to procrastinate, and then you become paralyzed because you cannot achieve the perfection, and you start to procrastinate, and everything sort of builds on each other. And so these are all failed jobs. These are jobs where I was hired on to do something. This was a poster assignment. These were all gallery jobs. There was like a tattoo assignment from some like really rich person. They were like, I like your weird work, draw me this tattoo, I'm gonna pay you a bunch of money. So I was like, oh good, money, I need money. And so I went towards all of these projects with this idea of them being perfect. And I couldn't finish them. I had to email everybody and make up some terrible excuse about how I couldn't finish those assignments. I was like, yes, I'm terribly sick and I can't get this done. I'm so sorry. And all the art directors were very understanding. They were like, oh, that's entirely fine, Corinne, take your time. Like, that's a terrible thing that happened to you. And internally, I'm just like, I just can't finish it. Like, this needs to be to a certain state, and I cannot achieve that state, and so I just can't get it done. I don't know what the next step needs to be to get it to be what I want it to be, and so I'm just not going to finish it at all. And although this didn't happen all the time, it happened enough that I had to start to learn that finished is better than perfect. And so when I approach my freelance jobs now, even if I know that it's not going to achieve the A++ state that I need it to achieve, what I've realized is that professional illustration is about sort of like a B+ average, right? If you can achieve a B+ consistently and do A+ intermittently, you're going to be in a really good state. But it took me a while to learn that. And then my last lesson is that you define what success is. So for a really long time, throughout my freelance career, I was thinking that being a commercial artist is what defines success. I needed to work for companies in order to be an artist, in order to achieve the things that I set out to achieve that mattered to me as a creative. And so I started to, throughout this course of failure, I was forced to redefine what success meant to me. And this is a really interesting trajectory, the reason why I'm using it as an example for this lesson. So in 2014, I was contacted by a gallery in Australia. It was the first time that my work was going overseas. I was very proud of myself. I was like, I can add that to my resume, and it'll be very impressive. Maybe more galleries from overseas will hire me. And it was a really open-ended gallery show, so I thought of this really neat idea, which was this like amalgamation of sort of spiritual, like the souls of animals that were marching through the wood. And it was meant to make people feel like a little unsettled. They had a little bit of red on them. I wanted to maybe indicate that they had been like hunted or harvested, or there was some kind of like connection there to the human relationship with sort of woodland animals. And so this was kind of like, conceptually, it was kind of a breakthrough piece for me, because it was very metaphorical, it was sort of subtle, it had all of the qualities that I really wanted in illustration. And I'm also not that great at traditional work, and so with this piece I tried a different painting technique, which really worked out in my favor. Sent that piece off to Australia, and the piece didn't sell, unfortunately, but the show went on, and then they said, oh, Corinne, we'll keep it in storage for a little bit, and then we'll send it back to you later on. So maybe 6 to 8 months passed. I didn't hear anything from the gallery. I went to go Google the gallery, and their website was down. And then I went to, I tried to find sort of other websites that might have mentioned them, and I found one, and it was an article about how this gallery was a scam. And they collected a bunch of work from artists and then stored that work, shut down the gallery, and then the owners of the gallery were nowhere to be found, and they were selling the work off to make a profit without the artist's consent. And so I had gotten wrapped up in what I thought was a really good opportunity, and then my work, something that I was personally very proud of, had been sent off to somewhere, assumedly. It was sent off to be sort of adopted by somebody else, and I wasn't going to see any of the profits for that. So that was a really low moment for me, I think, in just understanding how, not just like how unfair things are, but how you can't always control what's going to happen to you or what's going to happen to your work and the experiences that you have. But then 4 years later, in 2018, I was part of this artist collective community, and they were putting together an anthology of stories that people could write. And they were looking for like illustrators, writers. And so I thought, I don't have any commercial works going on right now. I have the time to apply for this. So I did, and they were like, yeah, Corinne, you can do this. Like, welcome to this anthology. And so I took this piece that had meant a lot to me, and I said, you know what? I can do better. I love that piece. I love that concept. I don't want that to die, and so I'm going to take control over that concept again, because it's still mine. Even though it exists somewhere out in the world, it's still my art. It's still my idea. So I re-proposed it for this story, and I wrote a whole story about it, so now it has sort of further context. This piece was so successful that the creators of the anthology decided to use it for the cover. And so they loved it so much that they had the cover embossed, and it was a big success. This piece was a turning point for me. So 2018 overall was a turning point. I submitted this to a competition, and the guy who ran the competition, it was Spectrum, which is like a fantasy art animal. He was like, I love this piece so much that I want this to be on the interior of the book itself. I want everybody to see this as soon as they open the book up. And so I felt like I had finally unlocked something with my work that I wasn't really able to achieve before, something personal and authentic within me that I felt like just was hard to kind of bring to the table in the past. And then on top of that, because this work was the cover of an anthology, and it showed up in that competition. I don't know why, but I was contacted in 2020 by Time Magazine, and Time Magazine referenced this illustration directly. They said, I saw this floating around, and I thought of you immediately for this assignment. And so something that I had re-brought to the table that I had made sort of with my own definition of success had then brought more people to the table looking for that same kind of work. And so they said, Corinne, can you do the same thing except you're using all of these characters and these sort of figures throughout literary history. It was for an article about 100 best books of all time. And so if I had defined success as being, as not being scammed or as sort of having sold that work, if I had sort of looked at success only from the standpoint that I could not fail, then I don't know if I would have been able to readdress this piece and then get some of the future work. So I'm trying to be really efficient with this. So from 2011 to 2019, I graduated in 2011, all the way up until 2019, we posed the question, was I a success or a failure, right? As I said, I had failed to secure a lot of professional freelance for the first 8 years of my career. I often tell people that it takes about 6 years before your work starts connecting to the projects that you're being hired for, and this is from experience, right? I had not gotten a lot of commercial work, but I had showed in 36 different gallery exhibitions and then built a customer base through convention work. So the gallery helped me develop a better sense of my work, gave me sort of a source for output where I could practice quality and sort of intention and match what people were looking for to the work that I was making. I had burned bridges with art directors, but I had learned my limitations through that lesson, right? And I had developed strategies to help me navigate my personal struggles, because those things, as I said, are not going to go away, and a career is a lifetime. So I had to learn those lessons at some point. I made personal work for years that didn't sell and didn't produce any leads, but it connected me to my authentic creative self. That piece that I was just talking about was something that I felt truly matched who I was as an artist, which did lead to commercial success. It was sort of the missing ingredient in my work. I had to develop that sensibility to who I really wanted to be before people started connecting with it. And then lastly, I became unafraid of failing, because I know that effort is the path that we walk, and failure is the knowledge that we gain, and success is the view that we enjoy along the way, right? We can't hyper-focus on only looking at the good views. You have to put forth the effort to walk forward, and you have to know that everything that you learn while you're on that path is important, and that's going to lead you to those places where you can sit and you can really enjoy the things that you've done. But if you don't think about the path that you need to take, it's going to be more of a struggle for you to get there, and you're going to be less prepared for that journey. So to recap, sometimes your work isn't good enough no matter how hard you try, because you are still growing your potential. If you don't learn to work with yourself, you work against yourself, which means that you have to develop strategies to stay productive and healthy that benefit everyone and make you hireable as an artist. Lesson 3, get a job. Because a creative career is about adaptation, it's about flexibility, and it's about choosing those unexpected paths. We're not here to only do one thing. I thought when I was graduating college that I was going to do that one thing. I was set up to be an editorial illustrator. That's what my professors wanted from me. That's where my style was going. That's where I felt I belonged. Turns out that wasn't the case, and it took me a long time to get back to a place where I feel like the work that I'm getting now, which is in the publishing realm, by the way, not editorial, is relatable to who I am. Lesson 4, finish is better than perfect, right? Focus on recognizing the path ahead. Not all steps are taken in equal measure. You're not always going to make the best piece of art. You're going to make a lot of bad art, and that's good, because everything is a step forward, everything is a lesson learned that you're going to take with you for the next piece that you create. And then you define what success is, because success is reflected in our efforts and not necessarily the outcome. Even though I had all of those failures early on in my career, the effort was there. I never gave up as an artist. I always found places that my art could go, and even if I didn't get the outcome that I was looking for, it didn't stop me from trying to figure out what my next steps were and sort of trying my best to understand what I brought to the table as a creative. And so from 2019 and onward, it has been sort of like I don't know if you would call it an uphill or downhill, but I have more freelance work, commercial freelance work now than I can accept. My inbox is constantly full. I am working on projects that I'm really excited about, that I feel like match who I am as an artist, so they're a lot easier for me to complete. The art directors are more flexible. I'm working with people that know that I have executive dysfunction disorder and will give me book covers with the time that it might take me to complete them, so they're understanding to my needs. And my work is being circulated nationally and internationally. And so if you look at this, you're like, wow, Corinne's really successful. Yeah, but all of that was built up by a place of unsuccess, of failure. So that's it. That's all I have to say. How much time do I have left?
You're good. If you want to do a few questions, pizza should be here in a few minutes.
Cool. So, does anyone have questions about anything that I've talked about? Anything that's relevant to your own experiences? I can go into more detail about some of the terrible things that have happened to me. This is the time, after all. Yeah.
What was an avenue that you attempted to go down, but was stopped by things out of your control?
That's a really good question, because I tried so hard to be in control of everything, right? That was part of the lesson that I had to kind of contend with, the part about myself that I really tried my best at to not have to face. And honestly, I think gallery work, the whole gallery experience that I had working traditionally was kind of a constant setback for me. I can paint, right? Like I can use the brushes and use the paints, but it was always a setback because I never really felt that connected to my work. And so I think that was outside of my control because I'm just not a painter. And I had to learn that about myself. You guys will find that there are certain types of work that you're just not good at, right? The greeting card thing, for instance. I'm not a graphic designer. Don't have me design things, please. I've done it enough times where I know that my brain doesn't work that way. It doesn't work in those specifics. You'll notice in my professional work, everything's wibbly wobbly. I don't like the math of art. I don't like those specific design things. So I think all of the times that I tried to be that, like all the graphic design jobs that I applied to that I was not hired for, the gallery work that was trickling in, but I was never able to sell my work at a higher price. It was limited, I think, by my skill and my ability to sort of elevate my traditional work in a way that mattered. So maybe not the answer that you're looking for, but kind of my experience. Max? Yeah.
What was like that moment that you decided to also pursue teaching as a route?
Yeah, so this is kind of a funny story. So I decided to be a teacher maybe a year or two after I graduated. And one of my old professors had, because I think I was so active in my college career, I was really active in crit, I was trying my best. By all accounts, I was a very active and committed artist. And so a position had opened up at Montserrat to be an illustration adjunct instructor. They needed somebody to help with their classes. And so I was broke, and my old professor reached out to me and said, hey, Corinne, there's an opportunity at the school. I think that you should apply for this job. And so I didn't have anything else going on at the time. I thought that maybe this was a good direction for me to go in. So I applied because I needed money. And I didn't think that I was going to make a good teacher, because I didn't think anything that I was going through was relatable, because I still had it in my idea that I needed to be, or in my head, that I needed to be successful to impart anything of value onto the folks that I was going to teach. And so I went into it thinking that I would talk about maybe only the safe things, the things that I could understand. And the thing that's funny about this is that I'm not a public speaker, right? Fast forward ahead, I got the job. For the first 6 years of teaching, at the start of every semester, I would get physically nauseous reading the syllabus to my class, because the idea of being in a room full of people was a terrible thing to me. I didn't like to be the center of attention, even though I needed that validation. So I had to practice the interview for that adjunct job like 10 times. I'm not sure, I have a friend in here, Stephanie, and I don't know if Stephanie remembers maybe giving me a mock interview at that time, but I needed somebody to ask me those questions so that I could fail repeatedly, so that by the time I got to the real interview, I could put on a facade that I knew what I was talking about. And so I did, and as I did adjunct teaching while I was working on my art, I did realize that teaching was something that I really enjoy, and that a lot of my experiences are valuable to help people in their own sort of understanding of who they are. And so my teaching career sort of developed and was cultivated as I grew as a person, but it certainly didn't start off with me thinking that I was going to teach. Other questions that folks have? All right, excellent. Well, thank you everyone for coming to my TED Talk. Now, hopefully this has given everyone some insight as to what you guys might experience on your own. I hope everyone in here fails. I hope all of you fail successfully so that you learn something about yourself and that it aids you later down the line. So remember what I went through, and then remember how important it is, I think, to eat your bitter meal and take something away from it.